Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to this afternoon's Mailers Hub webinar on political and election mail. We still have people coming into the auditorium here, so we're going to wait a little bit for them all to get in their seats, appropriately social distanced, and then we'll get going in about a minute or two. So we'll be right back to you. Just stay put, and we start in a few minutes. Thanks. Okay, well, good afternoon, folks. Welcome again to this afternoon's Mailers Hub webinar, talking about political and election mail. And today we have the benefit of a panel of four very knowledgeable speakers who will discuss political mail first, and then election mail, the somewhat more complicated of the two. So each of them will go over their comments and reflections on these two types of mail. Our first speaker will be Donald Nichols from the Postal Service. Don is the national lead for the Postal Service's political and mailing services. He mobilizes a national team of specialists who consult and support political campaigns, campaign strategists, and political alliance mailing partners. He manages USPS strategic sponsorships with political associations, including the development of leading-edge thought leadership. He also coordinates marketing and sales efforts to support the use of all mailing products. Second will be Dan Bentley, also from the Postal Service. He served the Postal Service for the past 10 years and is currently the agency's election mail program manager. In this role, he collaborates with a cross-functional election and political mail steering committee to develop and implement election cycle action plans to ensure the Postal Service and all employees know how to process and deliver election mail in a timely manner. Dan has developed communications that provided election officials with valuable mailing information and position the Postal Service as a valuable partner in the nation's electoral process. During his Postal Service tenure, Dan has been instrumental in the development of new products and initiatives. He has a bachelor's degree in business administration from Eastern Connecticut State University. Next will be Dave Lewis, who is president of Snailworks. Dave likes to say he's been in the industry since just after I co-founded the post office with my uncle, Ben Franklin, but that could be an exaggeration. Dave is the president and co-founder of Snailworks, the first web-based company dedicated to integrating direct mail and the online world. He's an expert on tracking mail with informed visibility and the boosting the value of mail with informed delivery. He has been working in the direct mail industry for more than 30 years and has held almost every possible position from a letter carrier in the 70s to operations and marketing positions to a company owner. He's a frequent speaker at industry events, including the National Postal Forum, dozens of PCC meetings, and other industry events. He served on the boards of many industry associations. He currently serves as the industry co-chair for MTAC User Group 4, Mail Visibility, and on other MTAC user groups. He's one of Mailers Hub's MTAC representatives. Dave lives in Frederick, Maryland. Last but not least, we'll have Josh McCaully. Josh is the managing director of Solutions Architecture for Grayhair Software, and is responsible for business development initiatives, maintaining extensive client relationships, and understanding client needs. Josh has been a key figure in Grayhair's growth over the past 15 years, initially in integral roles in both customer service and the IT department. His deep knowledge of client needs has led to key roles in several other areas at Grayhair. Those roles have included product manager, key account services for Grayhair's largest accounts. He has more than 20 years experience in the direct mail industry, including working with mail service providers. So he understands the challenges of marketing needs, operations, reporting, and data management. He's a graduate of Boston College, Carroll School of Management. Go Boston. Okay, well, with all of that said, I will now turn it over to our first speaker, who is actually in a different order here, who's Don Nichols from the Postal Service. So Don, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Leo. Again, I'm the National Lead for Political Mailing Services. So let's quickly, as we kick things off, define political and election mail. My colleague, Dan Bentley, will speak in greater detail about some of the differences. So here's a quick high-level definition. Election mail is really just any item mailed from an authorized election official that enables citizens to vote, while political mail is mail sent from political candidates, campaign committees, or political parties. Other groups such as PACs and outside spending groups can also send political message mail, and that political message mail also falls under the political mail category. So with that brief explanation, let's now take a quick look at the political mail landscape. Next slide, please. Against a backdrop of massive digital and social media expansion in the political arena, political mail has not only grown with the increase in total spend in the market, political mail has really outpaced the growth in market setting, in market share year after year. We began in 2014 with a market share somewhere between 3 and 4%. We moved to about 10% market share in 2018, and we're setting our sights to move to 14 or 15% here in 2020. You note that notably in 2018 midterm, we actually gained more revenue and volume in a midterm than we did during the 2016 presidential cycle. Next slide, please. So with that backdrop, here's a look at United States Postal Service political and election mail revenue over the first half of our fiscal years over the last 4 election cycles. And we're going to even include 2020. So as you take a look at the 2014 midterm, the 2016 presidential, and the 2018 midterm, as you can see, we are having a fabulous 2020 cycle as we continue to promote the value of direct mail as the most targetable channel for voter outreach. These early numbers are incredible. And even with the impact of COVID-19, over the period from March through May. We are seeing a return to normal volumes here in June, and we have not lessened our bullish expectation that this will be again, for the 3rd consecutive year, the most volume and revenue in the political arena for the Postal Service. Next slide, please. Well, obviously, with a lot of mail and more mail, we do not forget our service initiatives. And in recognition of the incredible growing volume in the political market, in conjunction with our marketing and operation teams, we've created a political mail servicing and reporting site on USPS.com. This site mirrors the electionmail.org site, which I'm certain Dan Bentley can speak in greater detail to, but it offers mailers the opportunity to communicate regarding upcoming mailings and also to report problems. And our goal right now, as we head into 2020, is to respond within 24 hours of any reported issue. Again, we have moved from an email marketing platform to this automated site, and we're really excited to introduce that for 2020. Final slide for me, please. And finally, and before I hand it off to Dan Bentley, I want to reemphasize the value of identifying political and political messaging mail with tag 57. Very simply, everyone, tagging your mail increases the visibility for our mail processing partners, and it helps support the timely processing and delivery. And so that's it for me. I want to go in much greater detail about informed delivery and informed visibility, but when I saw the panelists, Dave and Josh, I just knew, let me get out the way and let the experts speak about some of the things that they're doing in the market. I'm certain you're like me, you're excited to hear the following presenters. So with that, I hand it over to Dan Bentley. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Don. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Dan Bentley. I'm going to just take you through some high-level information today. We have a treasure trove of resources that we can make available to you. We have a lot of experts that if you ever have a desire for more information we have, and I just wanted to, start by kind of layering in and, talking a little bit more about election mail and political mail. As Don indicated, election mail is any mailing created by an authorized voting registration official mailed to a U.S. citizen for the purpose of voting. Election mail materials include the following list. It's a lot more than just registration and absentee ballot requests and the ballots themselves. There's a whole plethora of mail that's inducted in the mail stream by election officials during a given year. As Don was indicating with Tag 57, Tag 191 is for ballots only, for both domestic and international use. That particular tag gives that higher degree of visibility as mail is first inducted into the mail stream. From a handoff process within the plant, we certainly want to make sure that we are clearly identifying mail, and this goes to just one element of election mail visibility that I'll talk about in a few more moments. But this is just one element of election mail visibility. As the mail is inducted, please use Tag 191. And of course, I referenced already the election mail webpage. That's at www.usps.com/election mail. We've put together significant marketing collateral. We have Kit 600 available for everyone there. It's a complete folio of guidance on every topic related to election mail. So I'd ask that you please avail yourselves of that resource. Don's already covered off on political mail, but just, again, for that higher degree of visibility, please use Tag 57 when you're inducting mail into the mail stream. Next slide, please. Thank you. Essentially, what we're trying to do is layer in right now with the new COVID-19 realities. There's a lot of interest in expanding the use of absentee balloting as polling places are impacted. Obviously, the poll workers tend to skew older. They're the vulnerable population for COVID. As state executives are looking to minimize risk, they're looking to minimize the exposure through polling places, therefore the expansion of absentee balloting. Absentee balloting typically mailed in advance of an election, and it generally requires an excuse in some states to do that. Or in our new COVID reality, they're pivoting and they're making it easier for all voters to receive an absentee ballot. Vote by mail, if we think about states like Washington State, Utah, Colorado, Hawaii, let's say Oregon, those are the 5 that are presently all vote by mail states. They mail a absentee ballot to every registered voter. Again, we've discussed the use of various election mail visibility tools. The official election mail logo on the right-hand side is just one of those tools. We ask that every election official include that logo on the face of every election mail piece that they tender into the mail stream. Next slide, please. The military, Army Post Office, Fleet Post Office enjoys the label 11 DOD, which is a Priority Mail Express label that's affixed at foreign military installations. Ballots that are traveling to and back from military installations overseas are managed principally through military transport and contracts with commercial airlines. That particular tag is only for APO, FPO locations. The Uniformed Overseas Citizens Voting Act eligible voters, those being in the diplomatic corps and also the citizens living abroad, there are requirements that all ballot materials are mailed at least 45 days in advance to those voters. So the timing becomes very paramount when we think about, these late primaries going into August and September. They have very limited time to produce these envelopes and ballot materials correctly and get them in the mail stream 45 days in advance of November. Next slide, please. Challenges that we've experienced: misdelivered return ballots due to mail piece design. This year, we're principally focused in two areas, one being mail piece design and the other being timing as it relates to mail being inducted into the mail stream within days of a critical date, and that typically is an election day. Mail piece design, I would like to say that, every mail piece, we highly recommend that it's reviewed by a mail piece design analyst, ensure that the mail piece is complying with our mailing standards as well as automation compatibility. That being said, that is not the end of the story. It's very important to work with a mail piece design analyst, specifically because we have pieces that are inducted into the mail stream that comply with our mailing standards and automation compatibility. However, due to the nature of the mail piece, it lends to confusion for the voter. Case in point, we've recently had a mass mailing of about 6.5 million pieces. It came in on a trifold piece. The instructions could have been clearer with regards to the return of that absentee ballot request mail piece. Unfortunately, there were many voters that were confused by the piece, and they folded it the exact same way they got it. So when they put it back in the mail, it came back to them. We had to put a catch protocol in place to get those ballots going in the right direction to the boards of election. But it's very important that all mail pieces are reviewed by a mail piece design analyst. Additionally, we've experienced problems from a postmarking perspective. The facer identification marks, I don't know why, but there are some voters that think that that's where the stamps go. They must think that that's where they line up the stamp to affix it to the envelope. We've had several instances where voters are, placing stamps over the facer identification mark, which makes it more challenging for our algorithms to face the piece correctly and get it going in the right direction. So again, mail piece design is critical. There are other elements and other methods that we weight in the algorithm process to make sure that even if the FIM is obscured, we're getting the piece going in the right direction. Next slide, please. Again, late delivery. Many states have deadlines for requesting absentee ballots that are very close to election day. Case in point, there are many states that by statute, they allow for voters to request absentee ballots the Friday, Saturday, and Monday before election day. Even with first class service standards being, 2 to 5 days, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. It's difficult for us to, turn that around to the voter, get it to them before election day, and then of course, the voter would not have time for thoughtful consideration in returning it back in the mail stream to the Board of Election. So we're always challenged against the, states in the way that they conduct their elections and the time allowances that they have, but it's always being cognizant of the mailing, statutes that the states have versus the Postal Service standards for delivery. Mail piece locations, again, we're always advocating for the use of intelligent mail barcode. That is for tracking purposes. Additionally, we've recognized issues with local sweetheart deals where boards of election work with local post offices to keep the mail local, and someone would come in from the Board of Election to pick it up. That's problematic because it bypasses the plant scanning process, and then we have no visibility on the last mile of delivery. Mail piece preparation and mail service providers. Again, we try to collaborate with the professionals in the field. We understand that there's many constraints that print professionals are under with regards to quick timelines and budgets, et cetera, for the boards of election. But whenever possible, try to influence the decisions of election officials to use intelligent mail barcode. Next slide, please. Thank you. Recommendations. Again, ballot mail visibility. We've talked about the benefits of intelligent mail barcode. It makes it better for the Postal Service to track. It also extends information down to the Board of Election, which they can also extend to the voter. Case in point, Denver takes our scan data and makes it available to the voter through text messages and email notifications. That's probably the best use case of a end-to-end visibility for the use of intelligent mail barcode. Service type identifiers, as it relates to ballots, we've created 23 new outbound STIDs, service type identifiers, as well as, I believe we're up to 4 return service type identifiers for ballots only now. It gives us that higher degree of visibility as we're going through the all clear process in our post offices and more specifically plants. The plants can run reports to indicate when an intelligent mail barcode is used with the appropriate service type identifier. We'll know what's on hand so that we can get that going in the right direction. And ultimately, we can serve up all the scan data through informed visibility. Next slide, please. Recommendations continued. Again, the election mail checklist in the back of Pub 632. This is all available through USPS.com/election mail. If you look at Kit 600, it is one component of Kit 600. Again, automation compatible letter size reply envelopes. Board of Elections, we recommend that they use first class mail postage on all outbound absentee or vote by mail ballots. And of course, please always use the official election mail logo. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, just to reiterate, have a mailpiece design analyst look at every envelope, whether it's a stock envelope that they've had or they're considering a new envelope design. Please have them reviewed by a mailpiece design analyst, even though they can comply with our mailing standards and our automation compatibility. It may, in fact, be problematic for the voter, and we'd like an opportunity to evaluate that. Again, using informed visibility, and tag 191, which we've already discussed. Next slide, please. Return by mail date guidance. As you're inducting mail into the mail stream, please be cognizant of our first class mail. Most of it is delivered within 2 to 5 days, which is consistent with our delivery standards. Marketing mail is delivered within 3 to 10. Again, that's consistent with our delivery standards. On the return side, we always recommend that boards of election include a notification to the voter that they should be returning their absentee marked up ballot 1 week in advance of the due date, specifically election day. All of the deadlines for APO, FPO are posted on the Federal Voting Assistance Program website, and the link is provided here. Next slide, please. Address management. I'm just going to touch on this. There's obviously, most of you are aware that address management and address hygiene is critical to the success for boards of election. They're kind of an interesting group because they have a lot of stale addresses to which they mail to. That's a known circumstance for election officials. In order to change the roles, they have to follow very strict statutes. Typically, what they try to do is encourage voters, once they've moved, to notify them of the move so that they can either, take them off the rolls or add them to the rolls as appropriate. Next slide, please. These next 2 slides are just a handy checklist that I provide with state election executives. It's just something that they can use to quickly determine where they're at in the process. Again, there's a deep dive into Kit 600, specifically a much more broad scope checklist at the back of publication 632, which is that guidance for state and local election officials. So I'm not going to read this slide. I'm just going to say that, you know, these are just basic principles that we want you to check through. Next slide, please. Thank you. Again, this is more of the checklist. It's only, you know, 2 pages, very comprehensive, and we recommend that everyone, you know, follow this list for success during the 2020 election cycle. Next slide, please. Thank you. BME responsibilities. We have a handoff process. As mail is inducted into the system, we are actually handing it off at various points in the processing plants. There's log files that are indicated here. We're actually, you know, again, it's kind of like a signatory process. As we're going through, everyone is aware where the election mail is in the system. There's also a log for political mail. We're not losing sight of that either. As you're inducting mail into the mail stream, please avail yourselves to notify the Postal Service on the postage statements, whether they're paper postage statements or e-docs, that the mail being inducted is either election mail or political mail. Thank you. Next slide, please. Again, we're continuing our election community partnership. We have an extensive outreach campaign that we do from a local level. We have dedicated district election mail coordinators that are interfacing with local boards of election. From a national and area perspective, we have a very comprehensive outreach process to state election executives, being state election directors as well as secretaries of state. Anytime that they're considering legislative changes, we'd like to be involved in those conversations. Next slide, please. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Dave Lewis.
Well, before Dave gets it, I got a couple of questions here. The first concerns the current situation with transportation. As you know, because of the decrease in air traffic, air capacity, a lot of first-class mail has gone to the ground. And do you see this situation continuing into the fall to a degree that would impact the swift movement of political and election mail?
That's a good question. There have been some challenges as it relates to air support and, you know, being able to do the lift on, you know, mail volume. That's actually, you know, straightening out at this point. I have not heard that that's a continuing instance for the Postal Service. If there are delays, you know, we're always looking at additional carrier support to lift the mail volume. There are, however, some impacts to international service at this time, which we publish through our industry alerts. For anyone that has not signed up for our industry alerts, I would invite you to do that. If there are any service disruptions, either domestically or internationally, they would be available through the industry alerts. There have been, due to COVID-19, there have been foreign postal operators that are not receiving mail from the United States. When that occurs, if mail is, if it cannot be flown, we'll look at taking it by sea. But if we don't have routes that are providing that continuity of service, we'll return to sender the mail so that the election official can take alternate transmission modes.
Okay, thanks. You know, a couple of things on that. Anybody who's on the call today who may want to keep abreast of what's going on with international mail, we have on our website a page devoted to the announcements coming out of the Postal Service concerning international mail, and every issue of our newsletter, Mailers Hub News, has a special section that includes all the Postal Service's industry alerts and DMM advisories about international mail disruptions. Also, if anybody is furiously trying to take notes today about stuff, please remember there are handouts that are available And the handouts will include the links that you've been seeing on the different slides that have been used so far. Okay, well, I think let's go on then to the next part. Now we're going to have the industry perspective, industry comments, and leading off that will be our friend Dave Lewis here, who's the president of Snailworks. So, Dave.
Thank you, Leo, and good afternoon. I appreciate everyone attending, and thanks to Don and Dan from they've really done there's great resources right now for getting involved in election and political mail. Or maybe I said that backwards, political and election. So let's go ahead. What I want to talk about a little bit is the perspective in the market of for this small to medium size and mail service providers, what we've seen there, some advice we can give. So first of all, election season is pretty much here. If anything, it's been accelerated some, I think, by COVID-19. So some of the things that we've seen that can be helpful in getting a share of that business, because I think there will be more direct mail this year related to mail to elections than we've seen in the past. So talk a little bit about political mail, then we'll talk about election mailings. And again, just the political mail is sort of the advocacy political mailing for the candidates. They come fast and furious. That's the thing, particularly as a lot of it has to do with when the campaigns have money. Where they can get things printed as they have to respond to negative advertising for other candidates and things like that. So one of the biggest things you're going to find in winning political mail as a mail service provider is to be fast. Speed is everything. Make sure you understand your capacities and be bold, in my opinion. But while you're being bold, get paid. And that is sometimes a concern. If you're dealing with individual candidates, you want to make sure that that you have terms worked out, that you know them well enough to make sure that there'll be payment. There's famously some people who have lost a lot of money from not being paid on political mail. One of the things that we like actually is most of the political mail we see these days is bought through consultants. There are political mail consultants, and they usually work with a lot of campaigns and a lot of vendors. There's some very big consultants out there who distribute mail to an astonishing number of vendors out there. And then we see vendors subcontracted to other vendors, and it becomes quite a tangle sometimes. So that brings me to sort of the last point here on election mail. And I couldn't resist this, which is tracking really is essential. And I know I've got a vested interest in saying that. But the tracking of mail for the election mail, or for the political mail, I should say, we find the more important thing that our customers are looking for is not so much when the mail gets delivered. They really want to be able to prove it got mailed, because these consultants are often working with a lot of campaigns and a lot of vendors, being able to track that. And that's one of the things tracking is good at. It's good at showing when mail gets delivered, but it's good at proving it got mailed. So that's kind of I just wanted to make those points about political mail and our perspective on that. I think most mail service providers are probably doing well with that and getting into a lot of that business. So you go ahead and change the slide. And so let's talk about vote by mail versus absentee. And go ahead and click on this. Vote by mail, and there's a difference, and it's worth noting. So I want to talk about election mail right now. Vote by mail is is something there's 5 states right now that do vote by mail, and it's a growing thing. Obviously, due to COVID, there's a lot of controversy around it. But in vote by mail, we distinguish that as typically all the ballots are mailed to all the registered voters in a registration, or maybe it's a request for a ballot, whatever that may be. But there's one big mailing and then some smaller mailings, but it's more lean towards that heavy first mailing. Go ahead, and the next point is absentee ballots, which are practiced in I believe 50 states right now. Certainly we see a lot. It's a little bit different, and in this case, the voter requests a ballot. Now, some states have rules about that, and that's really something you have to deal with at your state level. But some states, that you have to have a reason why you need an absentee ballot. Most are loosening that these days to kind of a no-fault system. But again, from a processing perspective, with absentee ballots, usually you're going to have one big mailing or big-ish mailing followed by a lot of little mailings. So it's a challenge on a fulfillment perspective, and just kind of be aware of that as you get into absentee ballots. It's a little bit different. Sometimes the jurisdictions will start doing it on their own towards the end. You can go ahead and change it. So who runs elections? Typically it's states and then down to counties and to municipal jurisdictions. And if you can just go ahead and click this. And there are a lot of elections. And that's the main thing I want to bring home here. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for mail houses and providers of all sizes. I know, just as an example, Michigan has 1,400 different jurisdictions that run elections. Every township, city, they're all subsections of a county, but they all run their own elections. They all have their own election clerks. So there's a lot of opportunity. And one of the things they're finding, especially as they go into vote by mail, is that you may have a jurisdiction where Mabel in the back room filled in the absentee ballots for the 19 people who requested them, or maybe a couple thousand people. Now all of a sudden, even a small county or a small township has to mail to every voter in it. So they're really turning kind of frantically right now to mail service providers. So there is a lot of opportunity in that respect. You go ahead and change it. So, and click on the first bullet. Let me see. So some of the things, and you can just fill in all the bullets on this one if you would, rather than wait on me for each one. So election mailings can consist of ballots, as is kind of obvious. Then there's ballot requests. Election information can also be can be considered election mail. All these items are. Go ahead. I know I got more than that. Yes, precinct location, in other words, where to go to vote and things. So all this informational sample ballots, many things that the jurisdictions are sending out. And again, these are all great, and these are actually kind of, a lot of them, the ballots and ballot requests are the most technical. The others are really much simpler for mailing companies to fulfill and to fill the needs for those without a whole lot of technical requirements. So again, a lot of opportunity tied into these elections. And so for mail service providers, you've got, again, there's a lot of time pressure. And that's part of why, and as I said, a lot of these jurisdictions haven't dealt with volume mail before, and so they're looking for help right now. So you want to make sure that you understand it and how to help them. Non-ballot mailings are not as encumbered as ballots. Like I said, there's fewer regulatory hoops. I know Josh is going to talk about a lot of the rules and the things you have to deal with in some of the ballot mailings. But the non-ballot mailings, again, great opportunities. A lot of times they're self-mailers or postcards. Good opportunity for mail service providers. Go ahead. One area we've seen a lot of people jumping in is MLOCRs. As Dan was saying, a lot of the jurisdictions have a lot of rules around their addresses, and they can't change them sometimes. They have to use old addresses. So running things through CAS certification and getting ZIP+4 attached that way can be difficult. And also running through an MLOCR, going through pre-sort's often a good way. Again, on vote by mail, especially where larger mailings than people are used to seeing in the past, that's a new opportunity for MLOCR operators. The other thing that apparently matters a lot from some of the MLOCR people we know is that ballots often weigh more than an ounce, so those additional ounce savings can be very significant. To take something from being first class to being pre-sorted first class can save a ton of postage. On the small scale, we also see some MSPs now that are creating labels for absentee ballots that they're giving to the counties or to the jurisdictions that'll have an inbound and an outbound IMB. So we can track it. We're doing a lot of tracking of these kinds of things. A lot of legislation is requiring tracking. So we're supporting that mostly at the MSP level. It's hard for us for providers like us to work at the jurisdiction level, just because there's so many little jurisdictions across the country. So there's different ways you can support those jurisdictions locally. Go ahead. So tracking ballots is my favorite thing, and go ahead and click on this. It does add integrity to the vote by mail process, and I wish I'd seen more about this in the press, which is if they could, with informed visibility, there is just it really does make this a much safer prospect than sometimes is shown, because you can track mail the ballots to the voter and the ballots coming back, make sure they're following the rules so they were mailed on time. So you can track ballots being mailed out. Go ahead and keep going. And tracking inbound ballots, which is interesting. And again, most jurisdictions are looking to vendors for support on this. The Postal Service, to their credit, is very good about getting people excited about tracking mail. Executing on it is a little tougher. So that's why Josh and I exist, at least in the business world, is to help people with that. Go ahead. One last thing I do want to show, and I think this is the last slide, is that what we've been doing for some customers is giving them unique IMBs to put on each inbound piece of mail, even if they don't match it to the voter. The jurisdiction is able to scan that IMB when it comes in, and then see when the mail was first scanned, when it was first put in the mail. Nice opportunity. Again, it adds integrity. That way, if something comes in after Election Day, rather than relying on a postmark, they can scan that intelligent mail barcode and see exactly where that mail has been where that ballot has been as it traveled back in. And so the keys to winning election mail, you can just kind of click through all these if you would, is if you have existing relationships with counties or with the jurisdictions that vote, by all means leverage those. They're going to look for people they know to work with. Provide lots of technical support, particularly on mail piece design. Again, MDAs are fantastic at this. The mail piece design analysts at the Postal Service are very helpful, but a lot of times, again, at a smaller scale, you might be able to step in and offer more support to make sure your local jurisdictions get their design done. Know the legal requirements in your state, and be a resource for that for your jurisdictions to help them. Full service, again, if you can do digital printing, if you get the fewer steps, the fewer people they can have involved, the more likely you're going to be able to win some of this election mail business as it goes through. And just a couple of good resources. Civicdesign.org has a lot of information about how to design ballots and ballot envelopes, and a lot of the rules that your customers will have to follow. It's a good resource to give to them. There's no selling going on there. It's just informational. And then the Postal Service has deliverthewin.com, which is a great website as far as for political mail. A lot of good case studies, a lot of good information there as well. And I think that is it for me. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce Josh McCauley. And Josh, it's all yours.
Thanks, Dave. So you can go to the next slide. I think, and I won't spend too much time on this. We've obviously, each one of us have talked about the differences between political mail and election mail. I do want to say, though, while election mail is probably more complex to create and manage, just because of all of the requirements and sort of rules wrapped around it. Political mail can be complex as well. A lot of the creatives I've seen, right, that people want to do have multiple matches in them, right, which generally lead to a higher price in fulfilling that mailing compared to, it's like a traditional 8.5 by 11 into a number 10 envelope. So it is an interesting market, and as Dave said, they're fast and furious. Their schedules change quickly, and it can be challenging to work with, but I think it can also be pretty lucrative. Next slide. So I'm going to focus more on enterprise considerations for election mail. And what I mean by that is the larger volumes, right? There are some states and counties that are, they do all of their elections via mail versus, having traditional polling places. Specifically, the West Coast does a lot of it. And there's other states that are looking into it, right? I think some of the challenges, right, though, as it's more and more of these counties and states want to start visiting it, right, or saying, is that something we want to move to? Buying equipment and setting up that type of operation internally isn't going to be easy, right? The equipment is expensive. the knowledge base to run that is difficult, right? So that's where I think there is some opportunity for traditional mailing companies to get involved and to help them out. There are some mailing providers that specifically focus on election mail, like that's all they do. But I think that they are running out of capacity, and there's a lot of opportunity out there. But some things you need to think about when doing election mail. The production of a ballot is generally a lot more difficult than a typical piece of mail because of the matching required. There's a lot of instances where you might have to do a 2-, 3-, or 4-way match in the production of that piece. Not that all mailing companies can't do that, right? But there's some districts that may require, or states that may require, a significant amount of an integrity, and I'll talk about that a little later. SLAs are always going to be tight. You're going to have to, as Dave mentioned, visibility is very important, right, in the tracking aspect of it. But there's also visibility that they may require on the production of that mail, which gets difficult to deal with depending upon the software and equipment that you have in house. Security and compliance, they come into play. And then where there's the outbound mail production, there's also could be opportunities for inbound ballot processing themselves. Next slide. So integrity, I'm going to sort of explain this. Integrity, can mean a lot of things, but what we try and focus on is, was a document produced? Was it produced correctly? Was it produced on time? And do you have proof that all of these occurred, right? And there's a lot of ways to sort of prove, to try and collect this integrity data and prove it. We work with some of our partners on file-based processing. Where a mailing file is generated that drives the insertion process and production process versus just, a camera system. And the camera systems do work really well. The file-based processing tends to have a little bit higher quality ratio. So what the file-based processing will do is, as a piece is going through a machine, it's going to make sure that the right pieces were inserted into it, checking via barcodes, and then making sure that that piece was produced, and if it was spoiled, we'll know it's spoiled and needs to be reproduced again. And there's going to be data collection of this entire process that can then be reported on, and try to have some understanding as to where there might be issues in your production process. Maybe it's a specific creative, gives you more challenges compared to others, and you're able to take that data back to your customers to try and help them optimize their ballots. And so, because of that, a lot of the ballots, there are a lot of ballots that use an open-faced OE or a windowed OE, but I've seen more and more people moving to a closed-faced OE just because the barcode will float out of the window, and that causes issues. We've also seen some issues where ballots were generated and they had 2 IMBs on the same face of the piece, and it was causing some issues in routing and stuff like that. I think Dan was talking about his was a different issue, but the barcodes can cause an issue too. So that's really important in talking about the design of the piece. So next slide. And equipment needs, right? So again, can you do this on traditional inserters without cameras and stuff like that? Yes, of course you can, but there might be requirements of the county or the state that you're working with where you have to have some more advanced systems, right? So I talked about file-based processing, camera systems that are scanning the barcodes, making sure the right pieces are inserted into the right piece, tracking all of those events through the production process, being able to keep tabs on your operators, making sure that the operators are doing what they're supposed to do, and then being able to report that back out, not just throughout your own shop for just general performance improvements, but also reporting that out to your clients, right? They may want to have that visibility into exactly how their pieces are being produced and going out the door. Next slide. Addressing requirements. So Dan touched on this a little bit. I'm just going into a little bit more detail. The addressing needs to be handled differently. Generally at a state level, they have different requirements, but we've seen some instances where counties may interpret it differently within the same state. And so there's very little address changes you can make, and they could vary between the states as to what they will allow occur or not, right? They may not ever allow you to apply an NCOA change on the piece. They may even allow very few changes via CAS to be made to that piece. It's just how they sort of interpret the rules or what they've been counseled on what they are allowed or not allowed to do. But there's also an opportunity to feed back that data to them of what the changes could have been, so they might be able to update their source systems, right? Because if the source systems don't get updated, right, they could lose the ability to follow that voter, right? NCOA data is limited, right? You know, generally most people have an 18-month license. There's obviously a 48-month license, but if you're not applying that change to the system, eventually they'll fall off that, and you won't be able to get that update anymore. So, you know, we work a lot with our customers to say, okay, we know we can do this via CAS and NCOA, and so we're going to apply that to the mailing file, but we're going to feed you back all the changes that you can then figure out how to you want to apply to your source systems, and maybe you contact, you know, constituents via another channel. And then return mail handling varies too. You know, we, as Dave said, we specialize in the IMB, and we do a lot of mail with ACS and secure destruction. But you know, there's a lot of counties that may not be even allowed to do electronic ACS, and you know, maybe they've been told they have to use manual ACS, and they're not allowed to use electronic. So there's a lot of education and working with them, and then setting up those return mail operations so they're able to see, you know, ballots that aren't getting delivered, and so they can try and work in getting those ballots to the right person at the right address. Next slide. You know, and then, you know, sort of just kind of echoing what Dave said about mail tracking needs. You know, there's a lot of things that may need to be taken into consideration on showing when mail is being delivered. You know, as Dave said, a lot of them just want to make sure the mail did get out on time, but there are some that do care about when it got there. And they may need to set different views, right? Like the state may want to see how all the ballots are doing, but then you may have specific county views you need to, or municipalities that need to have specific views of that data. Outbound and inbound unique tracking is really important, so they can, as Dave was saying, not only see when somebody may have received their ballot, but when that ballot is inbound, right? We like to keep track of everything, right? All that, the individual's name and address that you're being mailed to, the outbound IMB, the inbound IMB, so we can tie that all together and show exactly when an individual is getting their piece. And then we have some customers that want us to provision that data directly out to the voters themselves, so they can see where their ballot is, right? They're able to see exactly when they're getting it. And there's an enhancement coming to informed delivery. I think it's this weekend, that's going to be able to push informed delivery data through IV, which the past method was difficult to get the data, and you might be able to integrate that with some of the tracking views that customers might be interested in. You know, again, talked about ACS and secure destruction. Those are really powerful tools, but you know, some people may or may not be able to do them. And then providing a 360 view back into their systems. Some people want that data fed into them so they can keep track of every customer when they got their ballot, you know, just to maybe stop a secondary ballot from going out. Next slide. And one of the last things that you really might need to take in consideration is data security. You know, you're obviously, these are names and addresses, and they're names and addresses of individuals versus a marketing list. So some people take, you know, that data more seriously. Some things you might need to look into is, you know, getting your SOC 2. Some, you know, not always required, but there's different certifications in how you handle data. PCI is the payment card industry. A lot of other people like to follow their standards. High Trust is more tailored towards healthcare, but some of the people care about that as well. You may have to be required to do penetration testing, and then have a business continuity plan to make sure that your systems are you know, able to keep running if your business loses power, or something might happen, your data center goes down, or a server goes down, whatever it might be. And then compliance, I think the biggest one really is CCPA is a challenging one to be compliant with. You know, in just to give you an example, a California resident can contact a company and say, like, I want to know what data you're storing of mine, and I want you to remove it from your systems, and you have to have a process to purge it off your systems if you're storing it. That can get really tricky. And then you also have to make sure you can comply with data retention, destruction, and encryption processes that they require. I think that's it for me. Next slide. Yep.
There we are at that point. If anybody has any questions they'd like to add to the group at this point, ask to the group rather, there's a question box on your screens here to enter it. But I've got a couple here, or a couple of statements, observations, I guess. One is that from what Josh and Dave were describing, this is not simply your run-of-the-mill garden variety direct mail that's being produced. The sensitivity of it and the data security requirements are considerably higher. So any of the listeners who had experience doing match mailings, 2 or 3 4-way matches, this is sort of that kind of a circumstance on steroids, because you've got something very serious and sensitive that you're dealing with here. So making sure that everything works correctly, that your equipment is operating correctly, that you have ways to, as Josh said, recreate the mail piece if you need to. That's all the more important. And then I guess, Dave, is it traditional to have a very detailed SLA when you're doing something for not just a political committee, but also for an election group?
It really depends again on the size of the election. Some are very small, and there are usually some kind of state regulations that are covering what they have to do. So you have to at least meet those requirements. So for the people we're dealing with, we've seen them all over the place. Some have been very specific. Some have been just put something in the mail, please.
Yeah, I guess the hazard for commercial mail producers that I'm sure that Dan and Don have seen is that you're working with people who understand what they want to get done, but have a hard time explaining it in mail producer language, and that mail producers then have to sort of discern what it is they need to do to achieve the objectives of the election people, particularly as Dave was saying, Mabel wrote it up and Mabel doesn't know what mail producers do, and they can't quite be sure that she's explaining her needs correctly. So, and that Josh's point, which sounds kind of cynical, but which is correct, there's a lot of CYA involved here, because the last thing that a producer wants to do is find itself on the wrong end of a complaint because some poorly explained specification of the election folks wasn't delivered as they would have wanted it done had they been clearer about what they need. So that's always the problem. Early along there, Dan, you were mentioning, and Don, you were mentioning that you have to kind of explain things to people, make sure that voters understand what they need to do. Don't put the stamp over the FIM and so forth. It recalls a story I heard a few years ago about ballots being mailed out to folks in college, and this is in Fairfax County, which is here in Northern Virginia. They couldn't figure out why the returns were not coming back too much, and it's because the kids in college couldn't figure out where to go buy a stamp, which sounds rather silly to us, but I guess if you grow up in a generation where you're not dealing with mail on an everyday basis, such a simple thing as where to buy a stamp isn't so simple. So I guess education is all a matter of who you're talking to and what you have to talk to them about. Well, I don't see any more questions here in the question box, so I think we've pretty much wrapped up things today. It was a very interesting and very, very challenging topic to cover, but I want to thank Dan and Don from the Postal Service, Dave from Snailworks, and Josh from Grayhair. Great presentation. Thank you for doing it today. Thanks to all of you who were on the call and paid such good attention. And again, there are handouts there. Don't forget to get those. The recording of today's webinar will be up for our subscribers to listen to or to download later on today, probably, if not today, early tomorrow. I want to thank Michelle for being the one who makes sure that everything works, because I'm just a pretty face here, and to all the rest of you who did so much to help out today. So again, thanks to our presenters, thanks to our callers. Our next webinar is in July on the mailer scorecard. Be sure to come back for that. Thanks again to everybody. We'll be talking to you later. Have a good day. Bye-bye.